With specs and forecasts on the collector market having turned, Perlman's strategies for expansion and growth proved foolish. In fact, they not only harm Marvel directly, but history now shows that the plan had widespread detrimental impact on the entire industry as well. With their favorite writers now gone and a fun pastime proving too expensive to maintain, fans became discouraged and many completely stopped collecting altogether. And comic book retailers were also infuriated because not only had they warned since 1993 that Perlman's plan was wholly untenable, but with a decline in comic book readers and collectors, their businesses suffered directly, with industry sales dropping by a whole 70%, leading to massive closures nationwide. Specifically, the BBC reported that shares that had been worth $35.75 in 1993 dropped to $2.38 in a mere 3 years. That was unheard of. So in a last-ditch effort to manufacture something to offset their mounting debt, Perlman created Marvel Studios. Not the one that we know today led by Kevin Feige, but a version that would have focused more on animation and television while they worked out the legal issues surrounding a move into film. Additionally, Perlman began negotiations to effectively absorb Toy Biz through a merger, the idea being that you'd be purchasing a profitable entity that could either serve as a version of collateral for more financing while also moving its profits to cover bleeding sectors. Last, Perlman also took out loans with Chase Manhattan that would in turn become its biggest creditor, but at the time, in exchange for a loaned amount, Perlman issued out bonds, specifically junk bonds, which in and of itself doesn't mean that they're worthless. It's typically a phrase that's referred to high-risk bonds, but to support the value, Perlman used his own stock so that way he could secure the financing. But quite a number of shareholders, led by Carl Icahn, argued that those moves were even stupider because now you're spending more money that you didn't have and incurring more debt when Marvel was already hundreds of millions in the hole. So Icahn assembled a group of burned shareholders and began internal challenges to remove Perlman as CEO. And for the next year and a half, an incredibly public and vicious battle took place, leaking into the public sphere. Icahn told the New York Times that Perlman was like a plumber you loan money to get him started in business. Then he comes in, wrecks your house, and tells you he wants the house for nothing. Seemingly in response to all of these challenges, Perlman filed for bankruptcy. Now, when a company under financial duress files for bankruptcy, it's usually seeking bankruptcy protection, in which the court issues an automatic stay, where no current or known creditor can engage in collection activities or pursue litigation against the company. Instead, the creditors would have to file with the court overseeing the case on the outstanding debt, and then they're subject to the court, meaning that the judge will determine if the creditor is even paid back, and if so, how much. And since Perlman wanted to retain control of Marvel operations, he filed for Chapter 11, in which a company can still engage in business and continue in its operations, versus a Chapter 7, where a company is effectively declared dead. All of its assets would then be turned over to the court, and the court-appointed trustee overseeing the matter would then redistribute those assets to the company's creditors, and with any leftover going back to the company's owners. If there's anything left over, which in a Chapter 7, more often than not, there isn't. But a Chapter 11 is meant to give the company time and space to reorganize the business and set up a structure and a payment plan where debts can be repaid. Plus, since this would be overseen by the courts, it would be binding. And by doing this, Perlman seemingly had the upper hand, because during bankruptcy, the debtor, the person that filed the documents, holds first submission. As in, within 120 days from the filing date, the party that filed has to submit a plan of reorganization, but the benefit here is that no one else can submit an alternative during this period. So whomever's in charge stays in charge. Moreover, there's an additional time period of up to 180 days that the appointed trustee can review the plan, hash out the details with the filer, and then submit that for the judge to review before the creditors can even look at it to vote on it. Now, part of the reorganization plan that was submitted was still the Toy Biz merger that Perlman had sought prior. And Perlman, whose personal wealth equaled around $6.5 billion at this time, wanted to buy out Toy Biz shares by spending $350 million of his own money on that company's outstanding stock. And even though the New York Stock Exchange delisted Marvel's stock, because that's what happens during a period of protection, the stock has to stop trading, it did seem as if Perlman's bankruptcy protection plan was going to work. He had even secured $100 million in loans from their own creditor, Chase. And one of the provisions of that loan was that it would be completely void if Perlman was removed from control of Marvel. Now, this financing was to allow for Perlman to pursue new avenues for revenue, including a chain of themed restaurants to be named Marvel Mania. Seriously, there was a deal with Robert Earl, founder of Planet Hollywood, and even an option for the first restaurant to be at the Times Square Theater. Well, Eichen and his team saw the reorganization plan, and they weren't having it. Now, bear this in mind. Perlman and Eichen were well-known billionaire Wall Street investors at the time. They were referred to as titans in a number of pieces. This war would probably be the equivalent of a battle waged today between Amazon's Jeff Bezos and Shark Tank's Mark Cuban. That's how severe and intense and public this dispute was. So Eichen and his team examined the plan submitted to the trustee and found that Perlman made a huge mistake that they could leverage to their own advantage. Because although he owned 80% of Marvel's stock, the controlling interest over the company, he had used his own stock as the base for the loans that he took out, meaning if Eichen could convince the creditors to join him in vetoing the plan and argue to the court that the plan was not only unrealistic, but more of the same practices that led to bankruptcy to begin with, then he and the creditors could petition to get the stock, and then they have control of Marvel. And in February of '97, that's exactly what happened, with the court granting Eichen and the creditors complete control over the stock. And in June, Eichen completely severed Perlman's involvement in the company by not only removing him from his board seat, but also by removing everyone from the board and replacing them with his own selection. By December, Eichen was in full control and Perlman was out. But Eichen's control was short-lived, because like Icarus, Eichen dared to fly too close to the sun, and in what could only be described as a failed attempt at a hostile takeover, he seemingly awakened a sleeping giant.